After losing my job and facing homelessness and deep despair, I took shelter in what I thought was just an abandoned house. Turns out it was haunted, and that terrifying experience somehow led me to an unexpected journey of redemption and becoming a line mentor to troubled youth. In southern Michigan, many residents commute across the state line to Indiana, where numerous trailer manufacturing plants offer employment. These positions are often highly lucrative due to a piece rate payment system. Because of this structure, it is possible to earn over $1,200 weekly without even completing a full 40-hour workweek. The primary drawbacks are the intense physical demands of the labor and the inherent instability of these companies, which typically undergo layoffs every 2 to 3 years. They also enforce a strict performance policy. You either excel or you are dismissed. This means newcomers have approximately 1 week to independently master their tasks and keep pace with the assembly line without assistance. Failure to perform, especially in roles that are physically taxing and require significant dexterity with power tools, results in termination. I have been involved in this type of work since I was 18 and continue to do so today. It offers excellent entry-level compensation with no prior experience required. This occupation helps me stay physically fit, allows me to work fewer hours, and provides a higher income than many of my peers in different fields. My extensive experience and demonstrated capability have made me a valued employee, granting me the flexibility to choose where I work among these companies, provided they have openings. This is my chosen profession. However, when I turned 20, my proficiency was nowhere near what it is now. I lacked the knowledge and skills I possess today. I was what is referred to as green, essentially a novice. At that time, I was frequently changing jobs every 6 months or so, largely due to a minor struggle with substance use, chronic tardiness, engaging in unprofessional conduct, and generally not taking my responsibilities seriously. I felt unmotivated and was experiencing depression. Finding employment has always been a challenge for me, due to a medical condition that impairs my ability to drive. My mobility and daily commute to work are complicated by ocular albinism, a form of albinism primarily affecting my vision rather than my physical appearance. This condition severely impacts my eyesight, placing it at the threshold of legal blindness. Despite this, my appearance does not suggest albinism, especially given my entirely Scandinavian heritage, where pale skin and blonde hair are common among my family members. I blend in quite well. I am only slightly fairer than the average Caucasian, but my eyes are where the difficulty lies. Throughout my childhood, I was constantly told I would likely never be able to drive. My father never taught me, and my parents never enrolled me in driver's education. Everyone advised me to simply accept this reality. Consequently, transitioning into adulthood and seeking employment became significantly more complex. I reside in a very rural region characterized by small, scattered towns, lacking public transportation or ride-sharing services like Uber. This is the reality of southern Michigan. I have always had to depend on others for everything. Once I secure a job, my immediate concern is arranging transportation for the initial few days, hoping that a coworker lives nearby and is willing to carpool. Over the past 4 years, I have been attending doctor appointments, and only recently was it determined that I could obtain a daytime-only driver's license. I currently hold a permit, and am practicing until I am confident I can drive safely without endangering others. This development occurred just a few months ago. My struggles to find and maintain employment are directly linked to this, which explains my profound distress when I was terminated. I was too visually impaired to drive, yet not impaired enough to qualify for disability benefits. I was caught in an unfortunate middle ground. Let's return to my situation at 20, a fledgling factory worker striving to succeed. I had just begun renting my first house, which, as it turned out, was genuinely haunted. My girlfriend, who had recently discovered she was pregnant, lived with me and was entirely dependent on my income. I had been employed at a reputable company for about 6 months when December arrived, bringing with it a round of layoffs. These reductions in workforce often occur during the winter slow season, when orders for new cargo trailers decrease. In short, I lacked the seniority to retain my position and was let go. This news was devastating, particularly because I had just secured a house and my girlfriend was expecting. My savings were minimal, approximately $600 to sustain us until I found new employment. And given my lack of a driver's license, securing a new job always took an inordinate amount of time. I realized I was in a dire situation and was inadvertently jeopardizing my girlfriend's well-being. To compound matters, cargo trailer factories rarely hire in December due to reduced demand for labor. Additionally, for reasons I cannot precisely recall, I was ineligible for unemployment benefits. Life felt like it was delivering a double blow. I was laid off at the worst possible time of year to seek work, With no substantial funds, no unemployment, and no hope. Throughout December, I desperately sought job offers and rides to prospective workplaces, mostly without success. Even restaurants typically aren't hiring during this period. Furthermore, I did not possess a high school diploma. Michigan winters are notoriously cold, and even the job market seemed to freeze. I became utterly convinced that my girlfriend and I would become homeless. Neither our families had space for us. We had nowhere to turn. All our friends were still living with their parents. Moreover, I had no alternative arrangements for my beloved dog, who is like a son to me and adored by everyone. I feared losing everything. Then, after New Year's Day, I received a Facebook message from a friend about a company in need of someone with my skills. He was an old acquaintance I hadn't seen in a while, but he offered to help me secure a job if I could find transportation to the location, which was 45 minutes away. I assured him of my experience and ability to perform independently and promised to arrive as soon as possible. After approximately 3 days of persistent appeals, I finally found someone to drive me there to apply. I met with the managers, they were impressed, and I was hired. However, a significant problem remained. I had no way to get there, not even for my first day. At this point, my bank account held precisely $0, leaving me unable to compensate anyone for assistance. The commute was lengthy, and people expected payment for gas. As it happened, my father worked in the same town as the new company, just half a mile downtown at a different trailer factory. My dad, however, lived about 20 minutes south of my home in a separate town. He offered to transport me back and forth, but it meant I would have to sleep on his couch every night and could only return home on weekends. This arrangement saddened me, but I had no alternative. My father and his wife housed 5 of my siblings, including my biological brother and 4 stepsisters. It was a large house but constantly busy. I struggled to get sufficient sleep, leading to sleep deprivation at work. If I was fortunate, I would be asleep by 11 p.m., but I had to wake up for work at 3:30 a.m. This early start is standard for all trailer factories, which begin operations at 5 a.m., necessitating a considerable drive. We also leave early to account for potential snowstorms or other travel delays. These workplaces rarely cancel operations, and any perceived attendance issues are met with severe consequences, often leading to dismissal. So there I was on my first day. I woke up sleep-deprived and headed to work, feeling like a dutiful employee. The managers greeted me, seeming to suspect I was under the influence, which in truth I was. However, this was common practice in Michigan and northern Indiana. I attributed my demeanor to lack of sleep. They then informed me I would be assigned one of the few tasks I had never performed, and it was considered their most challenging job. Not physically demanding, but requiring a level of precision that not everyone possesses. This particular task was incredibly monotonous, and any error meant starting over entirely. It was called hanging metal. Allow me to elaborate. Have you seen those large, enclosed, shiny metal cargo trailers that people tow with pickup trucks? Not the flatbed ones, but the enclosed models with gleaming metal sides adorned with hundreds of screws. Yes, that's what I constructed, 15 of them daily, and they were large units. The job I was assigned primarily involved fastening all that glossy metal onto the sides of the trailer. Each trailer could require over 500 screws, though sometimes it was 200, varying by model. We would take these extremely thin and fragile sheets of metal, adhere them to the trailer sides with glue, and then secure them with screws. Sounds straightforward, right? While not the most physically strenuous task, it is incredibly tedious. Once the metal was glued in place, we would snap chalk lines every 5 inches across the entire trailer. Some of these trailers stretched 50 feet in length. Then with absolute precision we had to drive a screw every 4 inches along each chalk line. Even a millimeter of deviation was unacceptable. They would demand that the entire side of the trailer be dismantled and redone. Furthermore, we used high-torque drywall guns and small square bit screws for this. These were the only tools fast enough to fasten metal to metal and maintain the production pace. These guns were difficult to control and could easily slip, damaging the metal with the slightest wrist angle. Even a single scratch or dent on the metal would result in having to tear down the entire section and restart. Quality was paramount in these facilities. Everyone makes mistakes occasionally, regardless of their experience level. Typically, these places offer minimal training. They essentially hand you a screw gun and instruct you to watch that person until you get it. That's precisely what happened to me. I was simply put on the line. This was customary and I was accustomed to it. However, there was a significant complication. The individual assigned to train me knew me. He was the younger brother of someone I had fought with years prior. A confrontation in which I had severely beaten his older sibling. This individual held a strong dislike for me. He absolutely refused to teach me anything. He deliberately made errors and then blamed them on me. I struggled to master the job because he offered no guidance. This was not a simple factory task that could be learned merely by observation. It required instruction and proper technique. I often say that hanging metal is an art form. This individual clearly did not want me to learn his craft. He wanted me fired. I attempted to appeal to the managers, explaining that he was sabotaging my efforts. They seemed indifferent or disbelieving, simply advising me to try your best. I could sense their profound disappointment. Their attitude was almost, "You've handled all these other jobs but you can't hang metal, really?" After about a week of this, my performance was clearly subpar. The managers were visibly displeased with me, and the individual continued his obstructive behavior. The culmination occurred when he slipped with a screw and immediately blamed me. This happened on an enormous trailer, what we referred to as a money trailer. A 50-foot unit, approximately 20 feet high. Hanging the metal on these required climbing ladders or using a scissor lift, a process that took hours. We were nearly finished when he made the error, but as soon as he did, he pointed the finger at me. The manager was furious. I protested, but he did not believe me. The individual who was undermining me had been with the company for years and was trusted. I recall the manager calling me an incompetent loser and ordering me to leave. I can understand his anger. He was under the impression that I had cost them hours of labor and thousands of dollars in sheet metal. I gathered my belongings and walked out, struggling to suppress tears. I had worked so hard just to get there every day. This job had been my last hope. I was on the verge of losing my house, my electricity, my water, my gas. Everything was hanging by a thread. I believed I would become homeless, lose my dog, my girlfriend, everything. I went outside and sat there, reflecting on where I had gone wrong. The truth, I suppose, was that I had simply been dealt a harsh hand. It felt as though all the struggles I had endured had finally caught up to me and defeated me. It was only about 11 a.m., and my father wouldn't finish work until around 4:30 p.m. He was paid hourly, so I was stranded there for the next few hours. I sat in profound misery in the depths of winter. Oddly enough, I hadn't cried yet, though I was fighting hard not to. After some time, a coworker, whom I knew and considered a friend, came outside to retrieve some metal posts for the weld shop. I explained what had happened. I asked him if there was anyone I could speak to about this, perhaps to appeal the decision or get another chance. I was desperate, truly desperate, and felt utterly defeated as a man. He suggested I speak to the plant manager, describing him as a very understanding and compassionate individual. My desperation compelled me to try. I went to the main office. I had the entire day. What was the worst that could happen? Upon entering the office, I was emotionally unstable, having suppressed tears for 2 hours. I asked the receptionist if she could page the plant manager. She did. The manager emerged, appearing cheerful and good-natured. He seemed like such a kind person, and I felt a glimmer of hope. I looked at him, choked out the words, "Do you?" And then the tears began to flow like a torrent. I couldn't even finish asking if he had any open positions. I simply stood there, sobbing uncontrollably in front of him and his colleagues. It was made worse by my desperate attempts to stop crying. The manager looked at me with the most sorrowful expression I had ever witnessed. He knew I had been fired without me having to say a word. Have you ever seen a grown man cry? It is not a pleasant sight. It is deeply uncomfortable and makes everyone in the room uneasy. Several office workers were present, observing the entire scene. The receptionist retreated to the bathroom. All eyes were on me as I wept uncontrollably. The shame I felt intensified the situation, bringing forth even more tears. I couldn't speak for a solid minute, I reckon. Then when I finally regained my voice, I stammered, "Do you have anything open over here?" More crying and battling tears. "I got fired over there. Carl blamed me for his mistake and he wouldn't train me. I don't know what I did wrong." More tears. "I'm sorry, I'm just in a very bad place right now, and this job was all I had." More tears. After a moment, the manager said, We might have something. Give me your number." He handed me a piece of paper and a pen to write my name and contact information. I felt as though I had guilt-tripped him into this, but I couldn't help it. I scrawled my name and number. He patted me on the shoulder and told me to speak with the shipping manager. The shipping manager emerged and placed a hand on my shoulder, leading me into his office. I felt like a distressed child being comforted by his father. This again exacerbated my tears. Once in his office, I was still sobbing. He began asking me questions. He inquired if I had misrepresented anything on my application, or if I had ever been fired. He asked my age. He then suggested that this industry might not be suitable for me, implying I might not be resilient enough. Considering the circumstances, what had happened to me was, in fact, common in this industry. It happens to many. I explained to him. No, I have been doing this since I was 18. I have just struggled so much to secure and maintain this job. I haven't been home in a week. I am on the verge of homelessness. I have a baby on the way. Everything is falling apart. And this job was all I had left. After my explanation, he simply stared at me blankly and said, I'm sorry, son. I'll call you if I have a job for you. I asked if I could remain in the office until my father arrived, as I had to wait all day, and it was 12 degrees Fahrenheit outside. I believe we were in a winter storm at the time. He permitted me to stay. I remained in the office teary-eyed, while all the people who had just witnessed my public breakdown sat awkwardly and continued their work, casting glances and whispering amongst themselves. I cried a couple more times, attempting to be discreet, but to no avail. After approximately 4 more hours, my father arrived and picked me up. I had stopped crying by this point, though I suspect he might have known due to my likely red eyes. He asked what was wrong. I told him I had been fired, but I misrepresented the reason. I told him I had gotten into an argument with the boss and had been fired like a man. I revealed nothing about the crying or pleading for my job. He probably would have understood, but I simply couldn't endure that level of shame. My father is a stern man. He is deeply compassionate and caring, yet also unyielding. He values strength and determination. I had exhibited the exact opposite that day. I had behaved like a child and then lied to his face about it. He playfully called me a dumbass and asked if I would ever learn to keep a job. He reminded me I had a child on the way and needed to get my act together. This nearly brought me to tears again. He informed me that I was running out of employment options. I acknowledged this, and after that, neither of us spoke another word. We drove back in silence. He dropped me off at my house. I broke the news of my termination to my girlfriend, recounting the same fabricated story and never revealing to her or anyone else the extent of my emotional breakdown. This was the most agonizing experience of my life. I felt defeated, no longer a man. On top of everything, I believed my life was over. Everything was lost. There was no glimmer of hope. I spent a week in bed, consumed by depression. I was certain I would never redeem myself. To this day, I still have dreams about that event. I know it might seem like I'm overstating its significance, but crying is not something a man does, especially in front of strangers. This is one of the most shameful acts a man can commit, yet I couldn't help it. I couldn't stop it. Everything that had ever held me back simply surged forth uncontrollably. There was no stopping it. Women may not comprehend this. It is generally accepted for a woman to cry, but never a man. Most men might not understand either, but where I live, there is a distinct cultural expectation. Crying as a grown man is not part of that culture. I suffered from this for a period. However, there were indeed silver linings. After exhausting all the money from the week I had worked at that place, I had nothing. I was on the brink of losing everything. But one day my grandpa made a surprise visit. I hadn't seen him in a while. He inquired about my well-being and expressed a desire to meet my girlfriend. I was candid about my struggles, sharing everything except the crying. He offered to lend me a sum of money to cover my bills and ensure we had food until I could secure a job, provided I promised to repay him. This brought immense relief. My pride initially resisted accepting the help, but I knew I had no choice. My grandpa had just saved me from utter ruin. I am still gradually repaying him to this day. Shortly after my grandpa's intervention, I received a job offer from a very reputable trailer company. I accepted the position and worked there successfully for a year. I am now employed at a different company that is equally good, but I have advanced in the hierarchy and have a secure footing in my profession. I have job security and a comfortable living. I have no reason to cry. Things are going well. This was undoubtedly the worst experience of my life. I thought I was finished, but now things are good. Thanks to my grandpa, we are now thriving. Yet I will never forget that day. I will probably always have dreams about it occasionally. I learned a valuable lesson. No matter what happens, you cannot fall apart. There is always a silver lining, even when it is not immediately apparent. I have never discussed this with anyone. I have also never spoken about my albinism online. This is the first time for both. Update 1. It has now been a full 5 years since that winter, the day I wept openly in a factory office, wiping my dough-covered hands on the last clean corner of my work jacket, trying to comprehend a world that seemed determined to crush me between layoffs, legal blindness, and the stubborn pride of the Rust Belt. In the years since, much has changed and much has remained the same. First, my daughter was born. Yes, it was initially a moment of, oh, what now? But when I held her and her tiny fist closed around my finger, everything else seemed to shrink. Having a child gave me something I hadn't realized I needed. A strange kind of courage, as if I could face anything if it meant keeping her and my girlfriend, now my wife, afloat together. It didn't matter that I couldn't drive after sunset or that I was still repaying my grandpa with $20 bills and homemade wild blueberry jam. I found silent ways to convey, I will make this work for you, even if half the time I still felt like a 12-year-old inside. I got hired at that better company. The work? Well, if you know, you know. For every trailer on the lot, there are 6 like me, sweating through prefab walls with power tools that could turn your hand into ground meat if you so much as blinked. There's a peculiar, backhanded dignity to it. It's heavy, repetitive, and precise, and you do it while chain-smoking the cheapest cigarettes outside the loading doors. I did what you do when you know you can't afford to fail. Arrive early, leave late, discover who runs the night shift, and ensure they believe you work harder than you actually do. I became quick with a screw gun. Honestly, it's like a dance, your wrist flicking between torque and texture. And I started assisting other novices when I saw them struggling the way I once did. That's how I met Jaden. A scrawny kid with lungs full of dust and hands that trembled whenever a foreman looked his way. He reminded me of myself minus the perpetually hazy eyes, and because I knew exactly how it felt, I supported him during his first major mistake. He rapid-fired a dozen screws half an inch off the chalk line, panicked, and began stripping them out. I made a joke about how crooked lines make the strongest structures, and when the boss came by, I essentially told him Jaden was with me. That was a first for me. I hadn't realized how good it would feel to step in for someone instead of retreating and letting them take the fall like that Carl guy did to me. And wouldn't you know it, Jaden stayed. Now he drives a Silverado that costs more than my house, and he brings me Taco Bell on his days off. Pays to have people in your corner. My vision hasn't improved, but my confidence has. I finally obtained my driver's license after what felt like 8,000 eye exams. Daylight only, just as they predicted. But in the daylight, I can drive my daughter to school and my wife to Taco Tuesday. I even showed my dad the plastic card, and he didn't say anything sentimental, but his eyes welled up anyway. 1 month, about a year ago, I heard from the old plant manager, the one who witnessed me ugly cry into my hands about not being tough enough for the business. He called after hours just to ask if I would consider supervising a line, mentoring some young guys the way I wish someone had mentored me. I nearly spat out my Mountain Dew. Me? A line boss? I accepted before he could second guess. Then I lay awake that night, terrified I would make someone else feel the way I did back then. But I also swore to never, ever treat a greenhorn the way Carl had treated me. It turns out a significant part of this job is never forgetting what broke you. The wild thing, the haunted house. Yes, it was genuinely haunted. Not like movie ghosts. More the kind that only reveal themselves by swapping your TV remotes and whispering static at 2 a.m. But I discovered, thanks to Reddit ironically, that placing a bowl of salt at every doorway seemed to calm the strange occurrences. My dog, who I swear could perceive things I couldn't, stopped staring so intently into corners. The house isn't luxurious. Harsh Michigan winter stripped the paint from all 4 sides, and the floor sags, but it is full. I mean that in every sense, especially since my in-laws faced foreclosure and stayed in the basement for 6 months. By then we had mastered stretching instant potatoes into a meal, juggling 3 part-time jobs. My wife took up night cleaning at the dollar store, returning with a new horror story almost every shift, and somehow still tired enough to sleep through the amateur poltergeist. There was one particularly extraordinary event last spring. A freak tornado, unusual for our part of Michigan, tore through a neighboring town. The factory closed for a week, power flickered intermittently, and our neighbors, whom we barely knew beyond the guy who snowblows the sidewalk at 4 a.m. and the kid with the purple mohawk, were severely impacted. Their roof was completely ripped off. I had a small amount of cash saved, so I bought OSB and helped rebuild a couple of walls, carrying sheets with one arm while holding my daughter on my hip. It turns out the blue-collar code in northern Indiana/southern Michigan is to show up, share tools, and say that'll do, instead of thank you. Looking back, if there's one thing that endured from that lowest day, besides the scent of antifreeze and cheap soap in a factory bathroom, it's that nothing, not even shame, is permanent. That day I wept, transformed into the best opening chapter of my life. I didn't remain broken. And now the guys I train and those who come to me after messing up a chalk line, they hear something I never did. You're not out of chances here. Life isn't all about monumental success, but I have the day shift, the right to dignity, a truck that gets us where we need to be while the sun is up. And whenever I see my grandpa, I share what's in my wallet. We no longer discuss the money, only what comes next. Every winter when the factory slows and whispers of layoffs resurface, I look around and remember I now have options. I have friends at 3 different plants and at least one person who calls with open positions if I need them. I haven't cried like that since, but if I did, I think I would be alright. It turns out sometimes it is acceptable, even for a grown Michigan man, to shed a few tears in public. It doesn't last, but the silver lining certainly does. Update 2. A year has passed since my last update. You could probably gauge it by the condition of my knuckles, the amount of sawdust ingrained in my bootlaces, or the way I navigate a trailer frame in 6 swift steps, as if I've become part of the machinery itself. Much has transpired, most of it the kind of chaos that simultaneously evokes worry and gratitude. I am still with my wife, which is noteworthy considering her mother moved back in for what was supposed to be a long weekend last spring and remained until the snow melted. My daughter is now a force of nature, a small whirlwind of string cheese wrappers and endless questions. She started kindergarten and now proudly tells everyone her dad builds shiny fortresses with fire sticks, which is what she calls drills. I challenge anyone to correct her. I finally repaid my grandpa. It happened in the Walmart parking lot, actually, and it was incredibly awkward as I insisted on counting out the money in $20 bills with people shuffling past. He repeatedly told me to stop making a scene. I still see him on Sundays for burnt coffee and whatever pie my wife attempts to bake. And it struck me. Paying off the debt didn't truly resolve anything between us because he never viewed it as a debt to begin with. Sometimes I wonder if that's why he allowed me to stretch it out in installments, just to ensure I kept coming back. But the most significant twist, I ended up on the other side of the good or gone policy. I was asked to train the new guys this spring. Not supervise, absolutely not. I never wanted to be the one who makes people cry for missing a chalk line. But to train, which in practice means showing half a dozen greenhorns how to keep all 10 fingers and not lose their spirit before lunch. The very first kid they assigned to me, a wiry fellow named Mason, looked at the sheet metal with the same haunted expression I wore that first week after Carl threw me to the wolves. He fumbled so badly with his screw gun that I swear the tool was resisting him. And before I could stop myself, I told him the story. Not the sanitized version, but the raw, unvarnished account of how I once cried in the office like a drenched cat. He laughed, then panicked, then found his rhythm. Perhaps it helped him to know that making a mistake wasn't a death sentence. There's a running joke in the plant now about the factory ghosts. The guys swear the place is genuinely haunted. Not like my old house kind of haunted, but legitimately. Lights flicker, and the radio warbles into creepy voices when the pressure washers are running. Someone taped a picture of Slimer from Ghostbusters to the breaker box. First I rolled my eyes. But then one night, working overtime when everyone else was off, I heard a freight cart rolling across the back end with no one nearby. Look, I'm not saying I believe in ghosts, but I swept the entire area with my flashlight and found nothing. Perhaps once you realize you've survived worse, a haunted factory becomes somewhat charming. Last August, the recession rumors hit us again. Orders dropped, managers became agitated, and I braced for a layoff. Only this time, instead of panicking, I spent a solid afternoon in the parking lot with a folder containing numbers, factory contacts, odd jobs, and guys at the RV plant who said they'd vouch for me if things turned sour. A strange thing happens when your sense of impending doom is preempted by preparation. It loses its bite. The layoff bypassed my line, but a number of my crew were cut for a month. A few others and I arranged rides, took side gigs stacking mulch at the nursery for cash, and someone found a broken snowmobile in the garage. We treated it like a team-building project, drank cheap beer, and endured curses from my neighbor when we backfired at 11 p.m. The guys all said, "Well, if they can't have us at the plant, we'll build something here." My daughter rode that snowmobile down our dirt road behind a Chevy on a tow rope, beaming. And for a foolish second, I felt like I was at the pinnacle. Earlier this winter, right when Michigan gets 2-foot snow drifts, I took on a side hustle because I finally could drive. And frankly, I wanted to do something good with it. I started using that daylight license to help elderly folks shovel their walks. Mostly voluntary with suggested donations, which sometimes meant hot cocoa and family gossip instead of cash. But it made my daughter think I was a superhero. And that's more than my own dad ever admitted about me. One Saturday, we cleared 3 houses before breakfast. Old Mrs. O'Malley's pipes froze, so I spent an hour contorted around a wrench under her sink while she told my kid all about how her husband used to sneak salt onto everything. For the record, salt in cocoa is an atrocity. And here's the wildest thing I never could have predicted. Last month, on the 5-year anniversary of my factory breakdown, unbeknownst to them of course, the plant manager asked if I'd speak at a community workforce day at the high school. I'm fairly certain he just ran out of other speakers. But still, there I was in borrowed clean jeans, explaining the art of hanging metal like some blue-collar TED Talk. Half the kids ignored me, but a handful, perhaps the ones who understand what it's like to be dismissed before you even begin, asked about my vision, my carpool strategies, and how to maintain your spirit when winter becomes harsher than your paycheck. A few weeks later, 3 of them showed up at the plant for interviews. I recognized the look, offered them some advice, and told them to call me if when the line gets brutal. Carl, by the way, the old saboteur, no longer works here. Word is he failed at every place he landed. Because when no one trusts you, no one follows you. I don't wish him harm, but it was a strange relief to know that karma, in the form of repeated screw-ups, might finally catch up to people like that. Sometimes, especially when I'm the last one lingering at work, I recall how it felt that day I sat sobbing in the office. How the world can shrink until it's just you, your failure, and a faint hope for mercy. But then the world expands again. In the low sun of winter light, in the comforting warmth of a daughter's hand, in the simple acknowledgement from a new guy who says, "Yeah, I needed that story." This update doesn't conclude with a fairy tale ending. Life isn't like that here. I still contend with financial worries and the peculiar grief of knowing that the best parts of you are invisible to the people who most need to see them. But every week, I am upright, employed, trusted, and driving one-handed between home, school, and whatever neighbor's roof needs patching before the next tornado. If the ghosts wish to follow, let them. I've endured worse. And now when things go awry, I know where to seek the silver lining before shame has a chance to take root. And perhaps, just perhaps, I'll allow myself to shed a few more tears next time, just to prove the world didn't break me.